us today on the Juliett Show. I'm your host, Collin Reeves, and tonight we have a wicked lineup of a great topic. Today's topic is the feminist movement across the globe, and we have a great lineup of guests today, starting with Cassidy Pirron, a sociologist from Yale University who has spent over 30 years in the field and has spent a lot of time researching a lot of the feminist movement throughout the years. Our second guest is Noonan, a sociology professor at Stanford University who has been teaching the feminist movement in her sociology course for over a decade and has spent lots of time doing research in the field. And our final guest is Jimenez. He is a feminist movement professor at Harvard University and has spent lots of time overseas doing research regarding the feminist movement across the globe. I'd like to welcome our first guest, Noonan. Welcome, Abby. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. All right. So, what can you tell us about some of the feminist movement going on across the globe and some kind of insight that you have to share with us?
Well, I think it's really important to mention the historic aspect of the feminist movement. There's 3 different waves that are important to know. The first wave started in around 1840. It focused on the roles within family, education, family, property, and especially women's suffrage. Women's right to vote was very important in this first wave. The second wave was starting in 1960. It was a more wide range of women's rights, including work discrimination and the legalization of abortion in the Roe versus Wade case that was famous during this time. And finally, we're going to talk about the current state of feminization, and that's starting now. It's the third wave. It focused on race, ethnicity, sexuality, all-encompassing. However, this is only focusing on the United States in particular, and so it's not really encompassing of all genders, races, and ethnicities necessarily.
Interesting. Do you find it important, or how do you feel about it, the third movement only encompassing the United States?
Well, I think it's important that we mention that it's all races, all ethnicities, all across the world, because if we don't do that, then I feel like the feminist movement is not what it says it is. It needs to relabel, particularly in protests. Yet they are inspiring. There are some protests that are a little bit too cliche, exclusive, etc. Dr. Surma Bilge, she is a very important sociology professor in this time, and she gives the intersectional lens towards the feminist movement. And this is more, she believes that these protests need to be more encompassing towards women. Especially there's an important protest that is popular throughout this time period, especially is the slut walk. It's very recent. Yet I feel like they focus too much on one certain race, one certain age area, so I feel like...
Can you elaborate on the slut walk a little bit for people who don't know in the audience?
So it was organized by a very important celebrity in Hollywood. Correct. And she organized this movement, and a lot of younger women came, a lot of specific races came. However, in opinions of the intersectional lens, they don't necessarily add to the full genders, all the races, all the different aspects of women that the feminist movement needs to provide.
Absolutely, and it's important to be inclusive of all genders and all races when you're striving for progression and idealistic views.
Yes, and this intersectional lens does, in some ways, debunk the feminist movement, but we still need to continue in a way to include the gray areas of gender and races as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Abby.
Thank you.
Now, I would love to welcome our second guest to the show. Cassidy Pirron is a professor at Yale University, spent multiple years in her field doing research, and we'd love to let's give her a hand and welcome her to the show. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Cassidy, what could you tell us about the feminist movement? Are there any like specific theories or idealistic viewpoints that people have and to go towards the feminist movement?
Yes, well, the standpoint theory basically talks about the oppression women are under and how it is giving them a distinct point of view, and how this point of view puts them into like the shoes of people that have marginalized them.
Interesting. You said that's a standpoint theory.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's like an empathetic viewpoint where they can just experience the, what would you call, the prejudices of the different genders and stuff like that?
Yes.
Interesting.
And specifically, Dr. Patricia Collins also believed that women specifically, focus too much on the voice as a whole, and how this voice is basically unacceptable because people, or women, gain this voice to only lose it again, and they're too just basically focused on the voice as a whole and how
the voice of the feminist movement of gaining their rights.
Yeah, and how it's not actually making actual changes.
Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of there.
Yeah.
Interesting. So Patricia Collins believes that the although they're making a lot of noise, there's nothing happening with it.
Yes.
Exactly.
And she believes that the only way to actually make a change is through impactful influences and justified opinions, and hopefully through that, women can get in positions of power and can actually make political changes.
So like are there items that she disagrees with or techniques that people are using to spread the feminist movement that she disagrees with specifically?
She believes that like certain like t-shirts or like posters or stuff aren't really fully like making actual changes.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're just kind of there and not really progressing the movement.
Yeah, and she believes that basically really the only way to get a change is to get women in power.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, interesting. And like political positions and or like higher authority and stuff like that in business and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's give her a hand. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Juliett Show. I'm your host, Collin Reeves, and I'd like to welcome our last guest today. His name is Michael Jimenez. He has spent multiple years overseas in the Middle East studying the feminist movement and how it is different across the globe, and it is my honor to welcome him to the show. Welcome, Michael. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Awesome. Good to have you. So, Michael, could you elaborate on how the feminist movement is different across the globe?
A lot of societal traditions based on religion. So it's a highly Muslim area, and the religion, it's a very patriarchal society. So it kind of puts an emphasis on men, and it doesn't have the feminism like a big role for women.
Yeah, it's male dominated, very patriarchal.
And there's also a lot of political unrest in those areas, in the Middle East especially, with militant groups, which makes it hard for women to bring themselves to the forefront, because a lot of the society's energy is being spent on these militant groups fighting them or supporting them.
Exactly. I mean, that makes perfect sense. The feminist movement can't gain traction because there's so much political instability in these areas that people are focusing on just trying to have any kind of freedom than fighting the feminist progressive movement.
Yeah.
Understandable. I mean, how would a success or how would aspect in the progression of the feminist movement differ in the United States when compared to like other places? And like, do you have maybe an example of how the United States differs in their progression of the movement compared to other places?
Yeah, for sure. So it's very important that we avoid a Eurocentric bias when we look at this.
Could you explain like what that means?
A Eurocentric bias would be looking at this issue only from like a United States point of view, not considering how things may differ in the East that make their issues different than how we have them here.
Makes perfect sense. Interesting. Well, Michael, are there any successes that have been universal or worldwide in the feminist movement? Is there any like step that the vast majority of the globe has taken towards the progressive movement of feminism?
Yeah, something that we've definitely seen in the United States and Europe for a while is the right for women to vote. And especially as of recently, a lot of more Eastern countries such as Jordan, they've allowed women to vote. They've even allowed women into candidacy. They can run for offices and
wonderful
positions in the government and everything.
That's a great step forward, I think.
Yeah, sir.
Wonderful. Well, Michael, thank you for joining us today and enlightening us on the progressive feminist movement. And I'd like to thank our other guests as well today for joining us. and granting us some wonderful insight on the progressive feminist movement, and we will strive every day to continue the progression. Thanks for joining us.